somewhere in America tonight, there is a man sitting alone in a house he fought to keep, with a scar running down his side that never fully stopped hurting, not because of the surgery, not because of the stitches, but because every time he looks at it, he remembers exactly why he did it. He remembers the hospital room. He remembers signing the consent forms. He remembers the doctor telling him the risks: organ rejection, infection, a lifetime of careful living with one kidney, and he remembers nodding and saying without hesitation that he would do it anyway, because the woman he loved was dying, and he was the only one who could save her. He gave her a piece of his body, literally, and she took it. She took it, healed, stood back up on her feet, and then walked straight into the arms of his best friend. That is not a movie. That is not something a writer invented on a slow afternoon. That is a real story, rooted in real court documents, real medical records, and real human beings whose lives were changed forever by a single act of sacrifice that should have meant everything, and somehow, in the end, meant nothing to the person it was meant for. And before this video is over, you are going to understand every layer of how something this devastating actually happens. Not just what occurred, but why. Not just what was done, but what it reveals about love, loyalty, and the particular cruelty of betrayal that comes wrapped in gratitude. The man at the center of this story, we're going to call him Daniel Cole. Daniel was not a complicated man. He did not have enemies. He did not have secrets. He was the kind of man who showed up for his friends, for his family, for his wife, without being asked, without keeping score, without expecting anything in return except the basic understanding that the people he loved would do the same. He was in his mid-40s when his wife, Rachel, received a diagnosis that changed everything inside their marriage overnight. Kidney disease, the progressive kind. The kind that does not ask your permission and does not care about your plans. Rachel's kidneys were failing, and the window for a transplant was narrowing faster than anyone had anticipated. Doctors gave them a timeline, not a comfortable one. And Daniel, without pausing to consult anyone, without sitting down to weigh the cost against the reward, walked into that hospital and asked them to test him for compatibility. He matched. Of course he matched. Because that is the kind of story this is, the kind where the universe sets the stage perfectly for maximum devastation. Daniel Cole was a near-perfect match for his wife's failing kidney. The surgery was scheduled. The risks were explained again, and Daniel Cole signed every form they put in front of him. Meanwhile, across town, in a quiet neighborhood not far from the hospital where Daniel was preparing to go under the knife, his best friend of over 20 years, a man named Marcus Hayes, was having a very different kind of conversation. A conversation Daniel did not know about. A conversation that had been going on for longer than Daniel was even aware a problem existed. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and let us know where you're watching from. We genuinely love hearing from our community all across the country. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the stories we cover here are the ones that most people never hear. The ones that happen behind closed doors, inside real marriages, inside real friendships, in real American homes. Stories that remind you that the most extraordinary things, good and terrible, happen to the most ordinary people. People exactly like Daniel Cole. And what happened to Daniel Cole is something that, once you hear it fully and completely, you will not be able to stop thinking about. Because here is what you need to understand before this story goes any further. The betrayal, the part that made headlines, the part that ended up in courtrooms, the part that had people all over the internet taking sides and arguing in comment sections for weeks, that betrayal did not begin after the surgery. It did not begin during Daniel's recovery, when he was lying in a hospital bed unable to walk to the bathroom without help. It did not begin in the months after, when Rachel was healing and growing stronger on a kidney that belonged to her husband. No. The evidence, and there is evidence, documented and time-stamped and entered into legal proceedings, suggests that what Rachel and Marcus had between them began before Daniel ever went under general anesthesia, before he signed the consent forms, before he sat across from a surgeon who told him he would be living with one kidney for the rest of his life. Which means that, while Daniel Cole was preparing to cut himself open for love, the two people closest to him in the world were already choosing each other. Take a second with that, because it matters. It matters not just emotionally, but in terms of everything that came after, every legal argument, every court filing, every public opinion and private conversation that this story ignited. Because once you understand the timeline, once you understand that the sacrifice and the betrayal were not sequential but simultaneous, that they were happening at the same time, in the same house, inside the same marriage, everything about this story shifts. The weight of it shifts. And the question that Daniel Cole eventually had to ask himself, alone in a house that still smelled like the life he thought he was living, becomes almost unbearable to sit with. He asked himself, did she know when she accepted his kidney what she was already planning? Did Marcus know, when he sat in that hospital waiting room holding Daniel's hand during the surgery, what he was already doing? And the answers, when they finally came, were worse than anything Daniel had imagined. Daniel Cole grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the second of 3 sons in a household where the word loyalty was not a concept that needed explaining. It was demonstrated daily, in the way his father showed up to every single one of his baseball games without missing one, in the way his mother stayed up past midnight helping neighbors during hard winters, in the way the Cole family operated as a unit that simply did not leave people behind. It was the kind of upbringing that shapes a man in ways he does not fully understand until much later in life, when the world tests him and he discovers that certain values were not taught to him so much as built into him, permanently, the way bones are built. Daniel did not grow up wealthy. He did not grow up with connections or advantages or a safety net that made risk feel comfortable. He grew up with something rarer and, in many ways, more dangerous. An unshakable belief that if you loved someone completely and honestly, that love would be returned in kind. He was not naive. That is important to understand about Daniel Cole, because it would be easy and unfair to look at what eventually happened to him and conclude that he was simply a man who did not pay attention, a man who missed obvious signs, a man who trusted too easily and therefore invited what came. That is not who Daniel Cole was. People who knew him from his early adult years describe a man who was perceptive, grounded, and emotionally intelligent in a way that men of his generation were rarely given credit for being. He noticed things. He read people well. He had good instincts. The tragedy of his story is not that he was blind. It is that he chose to see only what the people he loved showed him, because he extended to everyone he cared about the same fundamental respect he expected in return. He assumed good faith. He operated on the belief that the people closest to him were who they appeared to be. And for a long time, there was absolutely no reason to believe otherwise. Marcus Hayes came into Daniel's life during their sophomore year of college at Ohio State. They were placed in the same dormitory by accident, a housing assignment mix-up that put 2 strangers in a shared room for a semester and produced a friendship that would last, at least from Daniel's perspective, for the next 23 years. Marcus was different from Daniel in almost every surface way. He was louder, more spontaneous, quicker to laugh, more comfortable in a crowd. Where Daniel was steady, Marcus was electric. Where Daniel thought before he spoke, Marcus spoke and then thought and somehow still managed to land on his feet. They balanced each other in the way that only certain friendships do, the kind where each person fills in what the other is missing without either of them ever having to acknowledge it out loud. They became inseparable within weeks. By their junior year, they were sharing an off-campus apartment. By their senior year, they had the kind of friendship where a phone call at 3 a.m. required no explanation, no apology, and no hesitation on either end. After graduation, their paths diverged geographically for a few years. Daniel took a project management position with a mid-size construction firm in Columbus, while Marcus moved to Cincinnati for a marketing role that eventually took him back north. But the friendship held. Weekend visits. Annual fishing trips that they had been taking every October since 2003. A tradition that started with just the 2 of them, and eventually included a small rotating cast of mutual friends who came and went, while Daniel and Marcus remained the constant core. When Daniel got serious about Rachel, when he called Marcus and told him this was different, that this was the one, Marcus drove 4 hours round trip on a Tuesday night just to meet her at dinner. He gave his approval immediately and enthusiastically. He was the best man at their wedding. He gave a speech that made people cry. Daniel kept a copy of that speech in a drawer in his home office for years. He thought it was one of the most honest things anyone had ever said about him. Rachel Summers, Rachel Cole after the wedding, grew up in Dayton, Ohio, about an hour southwest of Columbus. She was the eldest daughter in a close-knit family, the kind of firstborn child who grew up carrying responsibility naturally, managing younger siblings, making decisions early, developing a self-sufficiency that served her well in her professional life, but sometimes made it difficult for her to ask for help when she genuinely needed it. She was smart, driven, and deeply private about the things that mattered most to her. She worked in healthcare administration, a career that she chose with intention, not accident, because she believed in the infrastructure of care, in the systems that kept people alive, in the unglamorous machinery behind every medical success story. There is an irony in that, given what eventually happened, that is almost too painful to name directly. Daniel met Rachel at a backyard cookout hosted by a mutual friend in the summer of 2004. He was 31. She was 29. He saw her across the yard, not a movie moment, nothing cinematic, just a woman standing near the fence talking to someone he didn't recognize, laughing at something he couldn't hear, and he found a reason to introduce himself within 20 minutes. They talked for 3 hours that afternoon while everyone around them drifted in and out of conversations. She was direct. He found that refreshing. She challenged 2 things he said within the first hour. He found that even more refreshing. By the end of the night, he had her phone number and a very clear understanding that she was not going to make anything easy for him, and that was precisely why he intended to call her the next morning. They dated for 2.5 years before Daniel proposed. Not because either of them was uncertain. Both of them were clear about what they wanted relatively early. But because Daniel believed that love deserved time, that a marriage was not something you rushed into simply because the feeling was right, that the foundation had to be built carefully and deliberately before you invited someone to live inside it permanently. Rachel respected that about him. Her family respected that about him. By the time they married in the spring of 2007, in a mid-sized ceremony outside Columbus, everyone in both of their lives had the same quiet, confident feeling that this was one of those couples that simply worked. Not perfect, not without friction, but real and durable and fundamentally solid in a way that most people recognized immediately. Marcus was there, as he always was. He helped Daniel pick the venue. He drove Rachel's younger sister to the rehearsal dinner when her car broke down. He danced at the reception until the venue staff turned the lights on. He hugged Daniel at the end of the night and said something in his ear that made Daniel laugh and then look at his new wife across the room with the kind of expression that people at weddings live for. In the photographs from that night, Marcus appears in the background of dozens of shots, laughing, dancing, holding a drink, talking to someone new. Always present. Always part of the frame. That detail would take on a very different quality later. But on that night, in that moment, he was simply Daniel's best friend, exactly as he had always been at the most important moment of Daniel's life. For the first 3 years of their marriage, Daniel and Rachel built something that looked, from every observable angle, like a life that was working. They bought a house in a suburb east of Columbus. They renovated the kitchen themselves over 2 weekends and one extremely long argument about cabinet hardware that Rachel still won. They talked about children in the abstract, comfortable way of people who have time, who are not in a rush, who believe that the future is a door that is not going anywhere. Daniel got a promotion. Rachel took on a larger administrative role at the hospital network where she worked. They took a trip to Nashville for their 2nd anniversary and a longer one to the Pacific Northwest for their 3rd. Marcus visited 4 or 5 times a year, sometimes with a girlfriend, sometimes alone. He slept in their guest room. He ate Rachel's cooking. He and Daniel stayed up late on the back porch the way they always had, talking about everything and nothing, the way that only old friends can. And then, in the spring of 2011, Rachel started feeling tired in a way that she could not sleep off. A fatigue that did not lift. She ignored it for longer than she should have. She was a healthcare administrator. She understood what symptoms could mean, which is perhaps exactly why she did not want to look too closely. When she finally went in for blood work, the numbers came back wrong. Then more tests. Then a specialist. then a word that changed the temperature of every room they entered after that. Chronic kidney disease. Stage 3, trending toward stage 4. The kind of diagnosis that does not come with a cure, only a management plan and a timeline that nobody wants to read too carefully. Rachel was 40 years old. She had been married for 4 years. And the life she and Daniel had been building, carefully and deliberately and with genuine love, had just shifted beneath their feet in a way that neither of them fully understood yet. Daniel's response was immediate and total. He did not panic outwardly. He did not fall apart in front of Rachel, not because he was suppressing his fear, but because his instinct in a crisis was always to move toward the problem rather than away from it, to find out what needed to be done and then do it, to be the steady thing that the person he loved could hold on to while the world moved underneath them. He went to every appointment. He researched every treatment option. He changed their diet inside the house without making Rachel feel like an invalid. He learned more about kidney function in the 6 months following her diagnosis than most people learn in a lifetime. And when the doctors began talking about the possibility of transplant, when the language shifted from if to when, Daniel asked the question before any doctor thought to suggest it. He asked if he could be tested. He asked if he could give her one of his. This is the part of the story where you have to stop and sit with who Daniel Cole actually was as a human being. Because a kidney donation is not a small thing. It is not a gesture. It is not symbolic. It is a major surgical procedure with real and permanent consequences. You live the rest of your life with one kidney. You are more vulnerable to certain infections, certain medications, certain risks that a 2-kidney person does not carry. You are advised to avoid contact sports. You have to be careful with over-the-counter pain medication for the rest of your life. You go into surgery knowing that something will be removed from your body that will never come back. And Daniel Cole, with full knowledge of all of that, sat across from a transplant coordinator and said, "Test me." And when the results came back and confirmed he was a match, he said, "Schedule it." There was no deliberation. There was no list of pros and cons. There was a man who loved his wife, and a wife who was dying, and a decision that for Daniel Cole was never actually a decision at all. What Daniel did not know, what he could not have known, sitting in that transplant coordinator's office with his hands folded on the table and his mind already somewhere past the fear toward the solution, was that somewhere outside that office, outside that hospital, outside the careful world he had spent his adult life constructing around the people he trusted most, something had already begun to shift. Not loudly, not visibly, with the quiet patience of something that had been waiting for the right moment and had decided, apparently, that this was it. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late October of 2013. Daniel had spent the 2 weeks leading up to it doing what Daniel Cole always did when something enormous was approaching. He prepared. He got his affairs in order, not in a morbid way, but in a practical one. He updated his will. He made sure their finances were organized and accessible. He told his 2 brothers what was happening and asked them not to make a big deal of it, which of course they did anyway, because that is what brothers do. He called his mother the night before and talked to her for 45 minutes about nothing in particular, the weather, a football game, a neighbor's new dog, and when she asked him at the end of the call if he was scared, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Not about the surgery." She asked him what he meant. He said he didn't know. And he didn't, not yet. Marcus drove in from Cincinnati the night before the surgery. He stayed in the guest room, the same guest room he had slept in dozens of times over the years, with the blue quilt that Rachel had bought at a market in Portland, and the nightstand that still had a water ring on it from a trip Marcus himself had taken 3 years earlier. He and Daniel sat on the back porch until almost midnight. Daniel had 1 beer. He wasn't supposed to have anything after midnight for the surgery prep, so he nursed it slowly and made it last. Marcus had 3. They talked the way they always talked, the way that 20-year friendships produce a language that nobody else entirely understands. They talked about the fishing trip they hadn't taken that October because of the surgery scheduling. They talked about a mutual friend who had just gone through a divorce. Marcus made Daniel laugh twice, hard, the kind of laugh that loosens something in your chest. And when Daniel finally went inside to get some sleep, Marcus stayed on the porch alone for a while. Daniel assumed he was finishing his drink. He did not think anything of it. Why would he? Rachel was admitted the evening before the surgery as well. The transplant team preferred to have both donor and recipient in the hospital simultaneously for final prep, final blood work, final confirmations that everything was aligned and ready. Daniel visited her room before he went to his own pre-op area. He sat on the edge of her bed. She was scared. She was not good at hiding it when she was truly frightened, and this was one of those times when the fear was larger than her ability to manage it into composure. He held her hand. He told her it was going to be fine. She told him she didn't know how to thank him. He told her she didn't have to. She told him she loved him. He told her he loved her back. The nurse came in to run a final check, and Daniel kissed Rachel on the forehead and walked down the hall to his own room and lay on his back in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling until he eventually fell asleep. The surgery took just over 4 hours. The transplant team was experienced. This was not their first paired procedure, not by a long way. Daniel's left kidney was removed laparoscopically, prepped, and transferred to the surgical suite where Rachel was waiting. The organ was viable. The connection was made. Rachel's body, after a period of monitoring that the surgical team described as encouraging, began accepting the kidney without immediate signs of rejection. From a purely medical standpoint, the procedure was a success. A clean, textbook success. 2 people went into operating rooms on the same morning, one of them giving up something permanent and one of them receiving something life-saving, and both of them came out of anesthesia on the other side alive. Daniel woke up in recovery with a pain in his left side that he described later as the most physical thing he had ever felt in his life. Not unbearable, but undeniable. The kind of pain that reminds you that your body is real and that real things have happened to it. His brother James was in the room when he came around, sitting in the chair beside the bed with his jacket still on, like he had driven straight there without stopping. Daniel asked about Rachel before he asked about himself. James told him she was out of surgery and stable. Daniel closed his eyes and did not say anything for a while, and James said later that his brother's face in that moment was the most peaceful he had ever seen it. Not happy exactly. At rest. The way a person looks when they have done the thing they were supposed to do and they know it, all the way down. Recovery for Daniel was slow and real and unglamorous in the way that all genuine physical recovery is. The first week was the hardest. Movement was painful. Sleep was interrupted. The medication made him foggy in a way he found deeply frustrating, because Daniel Cole was a man who lived in his own clarity, and losing access to that felt like losing something essential. He was not a good patient, not because he was difficult, but because he kept trying to do more than he was supposed to, kept testing the limits of what his body would allow, kept measuring his progress against a timeline that his doctors told him repeatedly was not realistic. His brother James stayed for the first 5 days. His mother came for days 6 through 10. Rachel was recovering in a different wing of the same hospital, and for the first week, they communicated through nurses and brief visits that the medical team allowed when both patients were stable enough. By the second week, Rachel had been moved to a recovery room 2 floors up. She was doing better than Daniel in terms of physical mobility. Kidney recipients often rebound faster than donors in the early weeks because the recipient's body, finally receiving the function it had been struggling without, surges forward with a kind of cellular relief that is almost visible. Rachel was sitting up. She was eating. Her numbers were improving daily. The nursing staff on her floor liked her. She was gracious and communicative and asked good questions about her own care, which made sense given her professional background. She asked about Daniel every day. Every single day, the nurses reported back. She asked how he was doing. Daniel was told this, and it made him feel exactly the way you would expect it to make a man feel who had just undergone major surgery for the person he loved. It made him feel like it was worth it. Marcus visited the hospital 3 times during the 2 weeks that Daniel and Rachel were both inpatient. This was not unusual on its face. Marcus was Daniel's closest friend. He lived less than 2 hours away. Of course he would come. The first visit was the day after surgery, when Daniel was still heavily medicated and mostly asleep, and Marcus sat with James in the waiting area for a few hours and then went home. The second visit was 4 days later. The third was at the end of the first week. Daniel was grateful for each visit. He told Marcus so. He told Marcus that he was lucky to have a friend who showed up like that. Marcus told him that's what you do for family. Daniel believed him completely. He had no reason not to. What Daniel did not know during those hospital weeks, what he would not piece together until much later, using information that came to him slowly, and then all at once, was that Marcus's visits to the hospital were not evenly distributed between the two patients. Daniel received 30 minutes of Marcus's time during the first visit, mostly while unconscious. Rachel received considerably more. During the second and third visits, Marcus spent time with Daniel, enough time to feel normal, to feel like a friend checking in. And then, after Daniel fell asleep or was taken for testing or treatment, Marcus went upstairs. The nursing staff did not find this strange. He was a friend of the family. He was friendly and appropriate and gave no indication of anything that would have raised a concern. He brought Rachel flowers on the third visit, yellow ones. Daniel saw them in her room when he visited her later that afternoon and thought Marcus had brought them for both of them and forgot to mention it. Daniel was discharged after 12 days. Rachel was discharged 4 days later. They came home to the house east of Columbus that they had renovated together, the one with the kitchen cabinets that Rachel had won the argument about, the one with the back porch where Daniel and Marcus had sat the night before the surgery. Daniel's brother James had stocked the refrigerator before their return. There were cards on the kitchen counter from neighbors and colleagues and people from both their families. The house felt full of goodwill in a way that Daniel found genuinely moving. He helped Rachel from the car to the front door more slowly than either of them had anticipated, both of them still moving carefully, both of them still carrying the physical memory of what had happened to their bodies 2 weeks earlier. He got her settled on the couch. He made her tea. He sat beside her, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment, just a moment, everything felt exactly like it was supposed to. The first month at home was defined by the rhythms of recovery, doctor's appointments, medication schedules, dietary restrictions, follow-up blood work, the gradual and careful reintroduction of normal activity. Daniel took 6 weeks of leave from work. Rachel was on medical leave as well, though her recovery was progressing faster than his. By week 3, she was able to move through the house freely and without significant pain. By week 5, she was taking short walks in the neighborhood. Daniel was still limited, still managing discomfort, still operating at a fraction of his normal energy. He did not complain about this. It was not in his nature to complain about it. He had made a choice, and he lived inside that choice with the same steadiness that he brought to everything else. Marcus started coming around more frequently once they were home. This also did not seem unusual at first. Daniel was recovering, Rachel was recovering, having a close friend nearby made sense. He came on weekends mostly. He brought food sometimes. He and Daniel watched football on the couch while Rachel rested. Once or twice he stayed for dinner. Once he stayed late into the evening and Daniel fell asleep in the recliner around 9 o'clock, the medication still affecting his sleep schedule unpredictably. And when he woke up, Marcus was gone and Rachel was in the kitchen washing dishes. Daniel thanked her for not waking him. She said, of course. She seemed distracted, but he attributed that to tiredness, to the demands of her own recovery, to the general weight of everything they had both been through. He did not press it. The second month was when something began to change in a way that Daniel could not quite locate or name. It was not a single thing. It was an accumulation of small things, each of which was individually explainable and dismissible, but which together, when Daniel eventually sat down and laid them end to end, formed a pattern that could not be explained away any longer. Rachel's phone, which she had always left on the kitchen counter or the coffee table without a second thought, began traveling with her from room to room. She started taking calls in the bedroom with the door closed, which she explained as work-related confidentiality that he had no reason to question. She seemed somewhere else in conversations, present physically but not entirely there, her attention pulled slightly in a direction Daniel could not identify. She laughed less. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but less. Daniel noticed. He filed it. He told himself it was recovery. He told himself it was the adjustment of coming so close to a life-threatening illness and then surviving it. He told himself people change after something like this. He told himself a lot of things. Marcus stopped coming on weekends. His visits became less frequent without explanation, or rather, with an explanation that changed each time. Busy with work. A thing came up. Next weekend for sure. Daniel noticed this too, in the opposite direction, because the two changes existed in the same time frame and some part of him. The perceptive, grounded part, the part that read people well, registered that they were connected before his conscious mind was willing to follow that thought to its conclusion. He called Marcus one evening in the third month of recovery, just to talk, the way they always had. Marcus answered, and they spoke for about 20 minutes. It was fine, normal on the surface. But Daniel got off the phone with a feeling he could not shake, a feeling that the person on the other end had been performing a version of Marcus Hayes rather than simply being him. He sat with that feeling for a long time. He did not know what to do with it. He did not yet have enough to do anything with it. The crack, when it finally opened wide enough to see through, came not from a dramatic confrontation, but from a Tuesday afternoon in March, 4.5 months after the surgery, when Daniel came home early from a medical follow-up appointment that had ended sooner than expected. He came through the front door to the sound of Rachel's voice in the kitchen, low, close, the particular tone of voice that people use when they are talking to someone they do not want overheard. She did not hear him come in. He stood in the hallway for 8 seconds. He counted them later, replaying the moment before she heard him and the call ended. She came around the corner with her phone in her hand and an expression on her face that Daniel had never seen before. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. Something that looked, he thought, almost like relief. Like something that had been held too long had finally, at least partially, been set down. She said she had been on the phone with her sister. He nodded. He said okay. He went upstairs, changed out of his appointment clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed for a while. He did not confront her. He did not ask questions. He was not ready to ask questions yet, because asking questions meant being ready for answers, and Daniel Cole, for the first time in his adult life, was not sure he was ready for what the answers might be. But something had closed in him in that hallway. Something quiet and permanent. The man who walked up those stairs was not entirely the same man who had walked into that house 3 minutes earlier. And deep down, in the place where a person knows things before they know them, Daniel Cole had already begun to understand that the story he thought he was living was not the story he was actually in. There is a particular kind of pain that comes before the confirmation of betrayal, the period when you suspect but do not yet know, when your instincts are screaming and your love is pleading with your instincts to be wrong. It is its own kind of suffering, separate from the grief that comes after the truth arrives. It is the suffering of being caught between two versions of your life, the one you believed in and the one that is slowly, reluctantly revealing itself, and not yet knowing which one is real. Daniel Cole lived inside that suffering for approximately 6 weeks after the Tuesday afternoon in the hallway. 6 weeks of watching and listening and noticing and filing and trying, every single day, to find an explanation that preserved the version of his life he had given a kidney to protect. He started paying attention differently. Not obsessively, Daniel was too disciplined for obsession, but with a focused, methodical attention that was closer to the project management skills he used professionally than anything emotional. He noticed patterns. Rachel's mood shifted in cycles that he began to map, not consciously at first, but automatically, the way an organized mind catalogs information without being asked to. She was lighter on certain days and heavier on others, and the lighter days did not correlate with her medical recovery, which was by now progressing steadily and well. They correlated with something else, something he could not see directly but whose gravitational effect he could observe. He began to understand that Rachel's emotional weather had an external source, and that the source was not him. He checked their phone bill. This is not a small admission. It carries a weight of its own, the moment a man decides to check a phone bill, because it means he has crossed a line inside himself from hopping he is wrong to needing to know if he is right. The bill was accessible through their shared family plan account online. He sat at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night while Rachel slept upstairs, and he opened the account, and he looked at the call logs for the past 3 months. What he found did not surprise him by then. That was the worst part. By the time the confirmation came, he was not surprised. He was simply sitting at a kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, looking at a number that appeared in Rachel's call history dozens of times, recognizing it immediately, and feeling something in his chest that was not rage and was not shock, but was closer to the particular grief of a man who realizes that the story he feared was true has been true for longer than he knew. The number belonged to Marcus Hayes. This was not by itself proof of anything beyond phone calls between two people who had known each other for years through Daniel. But the frequency was wrong. The timing was wrong. Calls at 7 in the morning. Calls after midnight. Calls that lasted 40 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. Calls on the days Daniel was at medical appointments. Calls on the days Daniel's brother had visited and the house had been full of people. The pattern was not the pattern of two people who shared a mutual friend. It was the pattern of two people who shared something else entirely. Daniel sat with that phone bill for a long time. Then he closed the laptop. Then he went upstairs and got into bed beside his wife and lay on his back in the dark and did not sleep until almost 4 in the morning. He did not confront Rachel the next day, or the day after that. He made a decision, and this decision tells you everything you need to know about the kind of man Daniel Cole was, that he was not going to act on incomplete information. He was not going to explode. He was not going to give Rachel or Marcus the opportunity to construct a narrative around his reaction before he had the full picture. He was going to be patient. He was going to continue to watch and listen and gather, not because he was passive, but because he was strategic in the way that people who have learned to manage enormous things without losing their composure are strategic. He kept showing up at the dinner table. He kept asking Rachel about her recovery. He kept doing all the things a husband does, because stopping them suddenly would signal something he was not ready to signal yet. He performed normalcy with the same thoroughness that he did everything else, and it cost him something every single day. The next piece came from a source he did not expect. A woman named Brenda, a mutual friend, someone who had been at their wedding, someone who moved in the same social circle without being central to it, sent Daniel a text message on a Friday afternoon that said simply, "Hey, can we talk? It's about something I saw. I've been going back and forth about reaching out. I think you need to know." Daniel read the message 3 times. He called her back within the hour. What Brenda told him was not a dramatic revelation. It was a small and specific thing, the kind of small and specific thing that carries enormous weight precisely because of its specificity. She had seen Rachel and Marcus at a restaurant in Cincinnati 6 weeks earlier. Not Columbus, Cincinnati. 45 minutes from home, in a city where neither of them lived or worked. On a Tuesday afternoon when Rachel had told Daniel she was attending a professional development seminar at a hospital in the northwest part of the state. They had not been doing anything overtly physical when Brenda saw them. They were sitting across a table from each other in a corner booth, talking. But Brenda had known both of them for years. She knew what Daniel and Rachel looked like together in a restaurant. She knew what two people who were simply friends looked like in a restaurant. And what she saw across that dining room in Cincinnati was not two friends. She sat with that information for 6 weeks before she sent the text. She told Daniel she was sorry. She told him she had almost not said anything, that she had told herself she was misreading it, that she had gone back and forth every single day since she saw them. She told him she finally decided that if it were her, she would want to know. Daniel thanked her. He kept his voice level throughout the entire call. After he hung up, he sat in his car in a parking lot for a long time without starting the engine. He called his brother James that evening. Not Marcus, not a friend from their shared circle. James, who was blood, who was outside the contaminated perimeter of this situation, who could be trusted completely. He told James what he had found and what Brenda had told him. James was quiet for a long time. Then James said something that Daniel repeated to people later, when this story eventually became something that other people knew about. James said, "Danny, whatever you decide to do next, do it right. Don't do it angry, do it right." And Daniel heard that. He let it settle. He made a decision that night about how this was going to go. Not because he was not furious, he was. Not because he was not devastated, he was that too, in a way that went far past anything he had words for. But because he was Daniel Cole, and Daniel Cole did things right, even when the world was doing everything wrong around him. He retained a divorce attorney the following Monday. He did not tell Rachel. He went to the consultation alone, during a window when Rachel was at a follow-up medical appointment of her own, and he sat in an office in downtown Columbus. and laid out his situation to a family law attorney named Patricia Ellison, who had been practicing for 22 years, and who told him later that in 2 decades of family law, she had heard a great many things. But the specific facts of his case had stopped her mid-note in a way that almost never happened anymore. He told her about the kidney donation. He told her the timeline. He told her what he had found in the phone records and what Brenda had witnessed in Cincinnati. He told her about the surgery date and the evidence he was beginning to assemble that suggested the affair had begun before he ever went into the operating room. Patricia Ellison put her pen down on her legal pad and looked at him for a moment before she responded. Then she told him that what he was describing was one of the most significant cases of marital breach of faith she had encountered in her career, and that if the timeline could be established with documentation, they had grounds to pursue an argument that went well beyond standard divorce proceedings. Daniel asked her what she meant. She explained the concept of dissipation of marital assets, the legal argument that a spouse who conducts an affair while benefiting from extraordinary marital sacrifice may be held accountable for that inequity in a divorce settlement. She was careful. She told him it was not simple. She told him that no court in Ohio had ever assigned a dollar value to an organ donation in the context of a divorce proceeding, and that the legal ground they would be standing on was genuinely unprecedented, and that opposing counsel would argue strenuously against it. She told him they might not win that specific argument. But she also told him that the totality of circumstances, the documented timeline, the magnitude of the sacrifice, the evidence of active deception during the period of that sacrifice, would form a picture for any judge that was very difficult to look away from. Daniel told her to file. He went home. He made dinner. He sat across the table from Rachel and asked her how her appointment had gone, and he waited. He did not have to wait much longer. 2 weeks after he retained Patricia Ellison, Rachel asked to speak with him after dinner. He knew before she opened her mouth. He could see it in the way she had been carrying herself all day, the particular weight of someone who has decided that a conversation they have been avoiding can no longer be avoided. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where he had opened the phone bill 2 months earlier, and she told him that she thought their marriage had run its course. She did not mention Marcus. She did not mention Cincinnati. She framed it in the language of personal change, of illness reshaping identity, of needing a different kind of future than the one they had been building. She was not cruel about it. She was measured and careful, and she clearly had thought about what she was going to say and had tried to say it in the way that caused the least damage. Daniel listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her he had already spoken to an attorney. Rachel's composure shifted almost imperceptibly, just a flicker, just a fraction of a second, but Daniel saw it because Daniel always saw things. He told her they would be in touch through counsel. He pushed back his chair, he picked up his plate, he put it in the sink, and he went upstairs. Rachel moved out 3 weeks later, staying initially with her sister in Dayton. She did not tell Daniel where she was going the day she left. She sent a text while he was at work. He came home to a house that was half empty in the specific, surgical way that happens when someone has thought carefully in advance about what to take and what to leave. Her clothes were gone. Her personal items were gone. The yellow kitchen cabinet doors that she had won the argument about were still there. He stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at those cabinets. Then he called his brother. Then he poured himself a drink, one, measured. Deliberate, and he sat on the back porch. The same back porch where he and Marcus had sat the night before the surgery, and he looked out at the yard in the dark, and he allowed himself, for the first time since all of this began, to feel the full weight of what had happened to him. The news about Rachel and Marcus became known in their social circle gradually, and then all at once, the way these things always do. Brenda had told a few people after she contacted Daniel. Rachel eventually stopped concealing the relationship. Marcus made no public statement of any kind, but his absence from events and gatherings where Daniel's name might come up spoke loudly enough. The reactions from people who had known all three of them were, by accounts that reached Daniel's second and third hand, almost uniformly negative toward Rachel and Marcus. People who had been at that wedding. People who had heard Marcus's speech. People who had watched Daniel go into surgery and come out the other side diminished physically for love. These were not strangers weighing in on an abstract situation. These were people who had been in the room for the entire story, and they knew what they knew. Marcus made one attempt to reach Daniel directly, about a month after Rachel moved out. He sent a text message. Daniel read it. The message was long, several paragraphs, and from what Daniel shared with his brother afterward, it contained an explanation, an apology, and something that attempted to reframe the situation as more complicated than it appeared from the outside. Daniel did not respond. He showed the message to Patricia Ellison, who added it to the file. He then blocked Marcus Hayes's number, not in a dramatic gesture, not with any announcement, simply as a practical act, the same way you close a door that serves no further purpose. 23 years of friendship. Best man at his wedding. The person who had sat beside him on a back porch the night before surgery and told him he was lucky to know him. Blocked. Gone. Some losses, Daniel would say later, do not announce themselves as losses. They just become facts. The divorce proceedings began in earnest that spring. Patricia Ellison's team filed their documentation. Rachel's attorneys responded. And the argument that Patricia had told Daniel might be unprecedented. The argument about the kidney, about the sacrifice, about the timeline of deception, began to take shape in legal filings that would eventually attract attention well beyond their courthouse in Columbus, Ohio. Because what Daniel Cole was attempting to do had almost no roadmap. He was asking a court to look at a kidney, at a human organ, at a piece of a living man's body that he had given to save a life, and factor it into the accounting of a marriage that had been conducted, at least in part, in bad faith. And the country, when it found out, had a great deal to say about that. The story became public in a way that neither Daniel nor Rachel had fully anticipated, and the mechanism was almost absurdly ordinary. A local legal reporter scanning court filings for the week, a filing that stopped her in her tracks, a brief piece in a Columbus area publication that was picked up by a regional outlet, then a national one, then shared thousands of times on social media platforms by people who read the headline and could not keep it to themselves. The headline, in various forms across various outlets, said essentially the same thing. Man sues for compensation after donating kidney to wife, who then left him for his best friend. And the internet, as it always does, immediately and loudly took sides. The public response was enormous and almost entirely sympathetic to Daniel. People who had never met him and never would, people across the country who had no stake in the outcome of a divorce proceeding in Columbus, Ohio, felt the specific outrage that this story produced in a deeply personal way. The comments and social media posts and opinion pieces that emerged in the days following the story going viral were united by a common thread. This felt like a violation of something fundamental. Not just legal, not just moral, something almost primal. A man gave his body. He gave a piece of his actual physical self, and the person he gave it to had, by the available evidence, been planning to leave him while he was still on the operating table. That sequence of events hit something deep in the national conversation, and it hit it hard. Rachel's attorneys, facing a public relations environment that was not remotely favorable to their client, issued a statement through a spokesperson. The statement did not address the affair directly. It did not address Marcus or the timeline. It spoke in careful legal language about the sanctity of personal medical decisions, about the fact that organ donations are by legal and ethical definition voluntary and unconditional, about the separation between a medical act and a marital contract. It was a legally coherent statement. It was also, in the court of public opinion, almost universally received as cold and evasive, and it did Rachel's public image no favors whatsoever. The core legal argument that Patricia Ellison's team was advancing was technically complex, but emotionally straightforward. They were not arguing that Rachel owed Daniel a kidney back. They were not arguing that the donation itself could be reversed or monetized in a literal sense. They were arguing that the donation had occurred within a marriage, within a specific set of circumstances and representations, and that Rachel's conduct, specifically the timeline of her relationship with Marcus, constituted a form of fraud upon that marriage that materially affected Daniel's decision-making in a way that had permanent physical consequences. In other words, Daniel Cole did not simply decide in the abstract to donate a kidney. He decided to donate a kidney to his wife within a marriage that he believed was real, based on a set of facts that were not true. Had he known the truth, the argument went, his decision might have been different. He deserved to have that inequity recognized in the settlement. Rachel's legal team's counterargument was also technically coherent. They argued that the law does not condition gifts or voluntary acts on the subsequent behavior of the recipient. They argued that marital fault, in Ohio's no-fault divorce framework, has limited bearing on asset division. They argued that the donation was made freely, with full information about the medical risks, and that Daniel's decision to donate was his alone and could not retroactively be converted into a financial instrument based on the breakdown of the marriage. These were not frivolous arguments. They were the kinds of arguments that have sustained legal weight. And part of what made this case genuinely significant from a legal standpoint was that both sides had real footing. This was not a clear-cut situation. It was a genuine collision between competing legal principles, played out in a context that had no exact precedent. The judge assigned to the case, a veteran of the Columbus family court system named Judge Howard Garrett, requested a settlement conference before proceeding to full litigation. This was standard practice. Courts prefer resolution to trial when resolution is achievable. But in this case, it was also a quiet acknowledgement that what was sitting on his docket was something nobody wanted to fully litigate in open court if it could be avoided. Judge Garrett was, by multiple accounts, a man who had seen a great deal in his decades on the bench. He was not easily moved. He was not known for emotional rulings. He was known for being fair, for being thorough, and for having a particular dislike of proceedings where the letter of the law and the spirit of justice were pointed in different directions without good reason. This case presented him with exactly that problem, and his handling of the settlement conference would prove to be the turning point. The settlement conference lasted 2 days. What was said inside that room is not fully part of the public record. Settlement conferences are confidential in Ohio. But what emerged from it, based on the final agreement that was filed with the court and on statements made by both legal teams afterward, told its own story. The settlement that Daniel Cole received was substantially more favorable than what a standard asset division proceeding in Ohio would have produced. The family home east of Columbus went to Daniel. A significant portion of Rachel's retirement account, accumulated during a marriage in which Daniel had been the primary financial contributor for several years, while Rachel managed her illness, was transferred to him. Spousal support was awarded at a level that Rachel's team had argued against, and a separate sum. Described in the filing in deliberately neutral legal language as compensation for extraordinary contributions to marital welfare, was included. It did not specifically say kidney, but everyone who read it understood what it meant. Rachel signed the agreement. Her attorneys advised her to. The public environment was not favorable, the legal ground was genuinely uncertain, and the prospect of a full public trial, with all the testimony and documentation that would have entailed, including the time-stamped evidence of the affair's timeline, was, by any reasonable calculation, worse than the settlement terms on offer. She signed. Daniel Cole walked out of that courthouse on a Thursday afternoon with his brother James beside him, squinting into the autumn sunlight, saying nothing to the 3 journalists who had positioned themselves outside. He got into James's car. They drove to a diner. They ordered coffee. And for the first time in almost 2 years, Daniel Cole allowed himself to eat a meal without the weight of what was unresolved sitting across the table from him. The day the settlement was finalized, a short statement was released through Patricia Ellison's office on Daniel's behalf. It was 4 sentences long. It thanked the court for its careful consideration of a case without clear precedent. It expressed Daniel's belief that the outcome reflected a recognition of what sacrifice means within a marriage. It stated that he had no further comment on any of the parties involved. And it ended with a sentence that was reprinted in dozens of articles about the case, a sentence that Daniel had written himself and asked Patricia to include verbatim. "I did not donate my kidney to win a legal argument. I donated it because I loved someone. What happened after that is for each person reading this to sit with on their own." The public reacted to that statement the way people react when someone who has every right to be bitter chooses clarity instead. It circulated widely. It was quoted in opinion pieces. A law professor at Ohio State cited it in a piece about the evolving legal landscape of marital sacrifice and good faith. Several people who had covered the story from the beginning wrote that those 4 sentences were more dignified than anything the legal proceedings themselves had produced. Daniel did not read any of it. He had already moved on to the part of his life that came after, or he was trying to. Meanwhile, Rachel and Marcus moved forward with their relationship. They had not made many public statements during the proceedings. Their attorneys had strongly advised against it, but once the divorce was final, they were no longer confined by that caution. They were seen together publicly. They eventually announced an engagement, and the announcement, when it hit social media, produced a second wave of public reaction that was, if anything, more intense than the first, because now it was not hypothetical. Now it was documented. The man who had donated his kidney to save his wife was sitting alone in a house in Columbus, Ohio, and the wife was engaged to the best man who had given a speech at their wedding. The image of that, the sheer, concrete reality of it, hit people in a place that social media commentary rarely reaches. The screenshot appeared approximately 2 weeks after the engagement announcement. It was posted by someone who identified themselves only as a former mutual acquaintance, and its authenticity was never definitively confirmed or denied by any party involved. It purported to show a text exchange between Rachel and Marcus, time-stamped approximately 3 weeks before Daniel's surgery. In the exchange, as it was reported by multiple outlets that reviewed it, Marcus references the upcoming surgery and Rachel responds in a way that, depending on your interpretation, either demonstrates awareness of a shared future they were planning or demonstrates nothing more than the conversation of 2 people navigating a complicated situation. The ambiguity was intentional or inevitable. It was never clear which. But the portion of the public that had already concluded the worst about Rachel and Marcus read it as confirmation. The portion that maintained more caution read it as inconclusive. And the debate about what it meant ran for days across comment sections and social media threads and text chains in living rooms across the country. Daniel was asked about the screenshot by 2 reporters who managed to reach him by email. He did not respond to either. His attorney issued a brief statement saying that the Cole Hayes matter had been fully resolved by the court and that her client had no comment on any materials circulating online. But privately, according to his brother James, who spoke carefully and briefly to one journalist months later, Daniel had seen the screenshot. He had looked at it once. He had put his phone down. And he had said quietly to no one in particular, "Yeah, that tracks." Then he had gone back to what he was doing. James did not say what that was, but from everything that came next in Daniel Cole's story, it is possible to make a reasonable inference. There is a moment in almost every story like this one. A story about betrayal, about loss, about the particular devastation that comes when the people you trusted most turn out to be carrying a version of reality completely different from the one you were living in. There is a moment when the story has to stop being about the people who did the wrong thing and start being about the person who survived it. Because the people who do the wrong thing tend to move forward into the consequences of their choices, and those consequences become their story. But the person who survived, the person who gave everything and had it taken, that person has to decide what comes next for themselves. And what comes next is not given to them. It has to be chosen. Daniel Cole chose. He stayed in the house. This surprised some people who knew him. There had been speculation that he would sell it, that the weight of what had happened inside those walls would make it unlivable, that no amount of renovated kitchen cabinets could outweigh the association of a place with the worst chapter of a person's life. But Daniel did not see it that way. He had built that house. Not metaphorically, he had literally worked on it with his own hands. The kitchen renovation, the back porch where he had sat with Marcus the night before the surgery, the bedroom where he had lain awake at 4 in the morning putting pieces of a broken story together. These were his rooms, his hours, his life. He was not going to let what Rachel and Marcus had done rewrite his relationship with his own home. He repainted 2 rooms. He replaced the couch. He put different things on the walls. He made it his, cleanly and deliberately, without drama. He went back to work 6 weeks after the surgery. The full recovery timeline for a kidney donor can extend to several months. But Daniel had been pushing that timeline from the beginning, and his body, stubborn and disciplined like the rest of him, had largely cooperated. His colleagues at the construction firm knew the broad outlines of what had happened. People at work almost always know more than they say, and they handle it the way decent people at work tend to handle personal crisis, with a combination of careful normalcy and occasional small gestures that demonstrate without announcement that they are paying attention. Daniel appreciated that. He was not looking for pity. He was looking for purpose. Work provided it. His physical recovery was complete by the following spring, about 6 months after the surgery, in the clinical sense that his remaining kidney had compensated adequately. His numbers were within normal range, and his medical team was cautiously optimistic about his long-term prognosis with appropriate monitoring and lifestyle management. What the clinical assessment could not fully account for was the psychological weight of living in a body that had been permanently altered for someone who was no longer there. Daniel talked about this once, with his brother James, describing it not as resentment, but as a kind of chronic awareness. A consciousness of the absence of something on the left side of his body that occasionally surfaced at unexpected moments. In the morning sometimes, during quiet evenings. He did not frame it as regret. He was careful about that word. He said he did not regret saving Rachel's life. He said he regretted who she turned out to be. These were two different things, he said, and it was important to him to keep them separate. He began coaching his nephew's baseball team in the spring of the following year. His brother James had 3 kids, twin daughters, and a boy named Carter who was 10 years old and obsessed with baseball in the single-minded way that 10-year-olds attach themselves to things. The team needed a coach for the Saturday morning games. James asked Daniel casually, not expecting much, the way you offer someone who has been through something hard a small thing to do with their hands. Daniel said yes immediately. He showed up the first Saturday in a plain gray sweatshirt and a baseball cap, and he stood on that field in the early spring light with 10-year-olds in oversized uniforms. And he did what he always did. He showed up. He paid attention. He brought his full self to a thing that mattered to someone he loved. The kids adored him. He came back every Saturday. He never missed one. Rachel and Marcus married in a small, private ceremony about 14 months after Daniel and Rachel's divorce was finalized. There were no public photographs posted initially. The experience of the past year had taught both of them something about the cost of visibility. But eventually, as people's lives do, images surfaced. A tagged photograph from a guest. A background detail in someone else's post. The wedding happened. It was real. They were married. And the internet, when it found out, did what the internet does. It found its way back to Daniel Cole's statement, the 4-sentence one about the kidney and the love and what each person should sit with on their own. And it circulated again in the context of the wedding news. And people who had followed the story from the beginning felt it in a different way this time. Not outrage. Something more complicated. Something closer to a recognition of how permanent and indifferent the world can be to the suffering of individuals. Life continues. People move on. The kidney remains. Several people from their shared social circle permanently discontinued their relationships with Marcus. Not as an organized decision. There was no group discussion, no declaration. But individually, quietly, in the way that people withdraw from someone when the accumulation of what they know about that person exceeds the capacity of the relationship to sustain it. Marcus had been a magnetic, popular figure for most of his adult life. He had always had a wide circle. In the years following everything that happened, that circle contracted significantly. Some of the people who pulled back explained their reasoning when asked. Some did not. But the through line was consistent. They had been at that wedding in 2007. They had heard the speech. They knew what it meant to stand beside a man as his best man and simultaneously be carrying the secret you were carrying. That specific knowledge, once it was known, was not possible to unknow. Rachel's health, by all available accounts, remained stable. The kidney, Daniel's kidney, continued to function well inside her body. She returned to her career in healthcare administration. She built a new life with Marcus in a different part of the state, away from Columbus, away from the social geography of everything that had happened. She gave no interviews. She made no public statements beyond the one issued by her attorneys during the proceedings. what she thought privately about the sequence of events that had brought her to where she was, about the surgery, about the settlement, about the screenshot, about the forced sentence statement, about all of it, is not known. Perhaps she felt justified in the choices she made. Perhaps she felt the weight of them daily. Perhaps some complicated human combination of both. She was not a cartoon villain. She was a person who made choices, choices that caused profound harm to someone who had done nothing but love her and try to save her life. And she had to carry those choices forward into whatever came next. That is not a small thing to carry, even when you have moved on, especially then. The legal case, in the years following its resolution, attracted attention in academic and legal circles that Daniel himself was largely unaware of because he had stopped following coverage of it. A law review article published by a family law professor cited the Cole settlement as an emerging reference point in discussions about extraordinary marital contributions and the evolving interpretation of good faith obligations within marriage. The article did not use Daniel's name. It referred to him as the donor spouse in the language of legal academia, but it treated the case as a meaningful precedent, a marker in a slowly shifting legal landscape that was beginning to grapple with the reality that modern marriages involve sacrifices and decisions that older legal frameworks were not designed to fully account for. The transplant medical community also took notice, not of the legal outcome, but of the ethical dimensions the case had raised about the intersection of medical voluntarism and marital fidelity, a conversation that several bioethicists noted had been waiting to happen for a long time. None of that was particularly relevant to Daniel Cole on a Saturday morning with 10-year-olds in oversized baseball uniforms. None of it was relevant to him when he finally, about 18 months after the divorce, began allowing himself to exist in the world again in the way that people who have survived something enormous slowly, carefully re-enter it. He started going to a local pub on Friday evenings with a small group of men from the construction firm, not to talk about what had happened, not to drink heavily, simply to be in a room with people who were easy to be with. He started cooking again, properly, which had been his hobby before everything, and which he had let go during the worst of it. He ran into Brenda, the mutual friend who had called him, the one who had seen Rachel and Marcus in Cincinnati, at a grocery store about a year after the settlement. They stood in the aisle and talked for 20 minutes. She told him he looked better. He told her he appreciated what she had done. She said she still thought about it, about the night she decided to send that text, about whether she had done the right thing or made everything worse. Daniel told her she had given him something the truth always gives a person, even when it hurts, even when the timing is brutal. He told her she had given him the chance to deal with reality instead of with a lie. She nodded. They went their separate ways. He thought about that conversation for a few days afterward. There are things about this story that do not resolve into clean lessons, and it is important to be honest about that. The legal system did what it could do within its own constraints and produced an outcome that most observers found more just than not, but which stopped well short of fully accounting for what Daniel Cole lost. No settlement figure captures the specific weight of living in a body that is permanently different because of a decision you made in good faith inside a marriage that was not operating in good faith. No court filing gives you back your best friend of 23 years. No ruling restores the version of the future you had been building, carefully and lovingly, and with the full investment of everything you had, before someone else decided to build a different one in the same space without telling you. These are not losses that courts address. These are losses that a person has to absorb and integrate and eventually, if they are going to have any kind of life on the other side of them, learn to carry without being crushed by. What Daniel Cole did with those losses is perhaps the most important part of his story and the part that is hardest to summarize because it did not happen in a moment and it did not produce a dramatic resolution. It happened in the ordinary, incremental way that healing always happens, in the Saturday morning baseball games, in the Friday evenings at the pub, in the careful cooking in a kitchen with the yellow cabinets, in the slow reclamation of an identity that existed before Rachel and before Marcus, and before any of this, an identity that was his alone and that nobody's betrayal could actually take from him. He did not emerge from this story a better man in the motivational poster sense. He was already a good man. He emerged from it a man who had survived a specific and profound test of his character and had come through it without losing the thing that made him who he was: his loyalty, his steadiness, his fundamental refusal to become the worst thing that was done to him. That is not nothing. In a story full of things that are hard to look at directly, that is the thing worth keeping your eyes on. Not the courtroom victory, not the public validation, not the screenshot or the settlement or any of the legal machinery that tried to put numbers on something that has no number. The thing worth keeping your eyes on is Daniel Cole on a Saturday morning in the spring, standing on a baseball diamond with his nephew's team, thinner than he used to be, with a scar on his side that still occasionally aches, smiling at something a 10-year-old just did with a bat, completely present, still here, still himself. Before we let you go tonight, we need to ask you something. And we want you to actually answer it, not just think about it, but go down to that comment section right now and answer it honestly, because this community has never shied away from the real conversations, and we are not about to start. Here is the question. If you were Daniel Cole, if you had gone through every single thing we just walked you through tonight, the surgery, the recovery, the discovery, the legal fight, all of it, would you have donated that kidney? Knowing what you know now about what came after, knowing the full story from beginning to end, would you have still done it? There is no right answer. There is only your answer. And we genuinely want to know what it is. Because here is what this story keeps returning to, no matter how many times you turn it over. Daniel Cole did not donate his kidney as a transaction. He did not do it expecting something in return. He did not do it with a contract or a condition or a backup plan. He did it because he loved someone and she was dying and he could stop it. That is a pure act. And the fact that the person who received that purity repaid it with deception does not change the nature of the act itself. It changes everything about her. It changes nothing about him. And there is something in that distinction, something about what love actually is versus what we hope it will be returned as, that deserves more than a comment section conversation. It deserves a long, honest conversation in your own life, with the people around you, about what you actually owe each other, and what you actually mean when you say you love someone. If this is your first time watching stories we don't tell, welcome. You did not land here by accident. The algorithm brought you here because something about this kind of storytelling is what you came looking for. Real stories, full stories. Stories that do not cut away before the hard parts, that do not soften the truth to make it easier to swallow, that treat you like an adult who can handle complexity and ambiguity, and the reality that justice is real but imperfect, and people are capable of both extraordinary love and extraordinary betrayal sometimes in the same lifetime. That is what we do here every week. And if you want to be here for the next one, the subscribe button is right there. Hit it. Because what we are covering next is the kind of story that makes this one feel like a warm-up. And we mean that with complete sincerity. One last thing before we go tonight. We said at the beginning of this video that Daniel Cole is sitting in a house he fought to keep, with a scar that never fully stopped hurting. We want to close by updating that image. Because by the time we finished tracing this story to its end, the picture had changed somewhat. He is still in that house. The scar is still there. But he is not sitting alone anymore, not in the way he was in the immediate aftermath, not in that specific hollow quality of aloneness that follows a profound betrayal. He is living, not performing living, actually living, coaching baseball, cooking in his kitchen, talking to his brother on the phone, being exactly who he was before all of this because that person, the steady, loyal, present, whole person, was never actually taken from him, no matter how hard the story tried. Some people give everything. Some people take it. And then there are the people who give everything, have it taken, and somehow find a way to still have something left. Those are the people this channel exists for. Those are the people whose stories deserve to be told completely, honestly, without looking away. Daniel Cole is one of those people. And if you have been watching this tonight and something in his story felt familiar, if some part of what we described tonight landed a little too close, resonated a little too deeply, then this last thing is for you. What was taken from you does not define what remains. That is not a slogan. That is what the evidence shows. That is what Daniel Cole's story, in its entirety, actually proves. We will see you in the next one.